Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ProSci webinar hosted by MARG. We shall begin sharp at 2 minutes past 12. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ProSci webinar hosted by MARG. We shall start sharp at 2 minutes past 12. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the ProSci webinar hosted by MARG. We shall start sharp at 2 minutes past 12. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Sudeshna from MARG Business Transformation, and we are presenting to you today the webinar on managing resistance to change from ProSci. MARG is a corporate training and consulting outfit in India in existence for the past 12 years. Our association with ProSci started more than 3 years back on becoming their global affiliate for the Indian subcontinent. The journey so far has been eventful, with a lot of transformations and changes happening to clients as well as us. We managed it internally as well as externally. At present, we stand among a few countries in the world who offers a whole suite of ProSci change management programs, the certifications, role-based, and advisory services. ProSci is all about research, and today's webinar gives you a good glimpse of the best practices on managing resistance during change. Now, our speaker for the day, Krish. The ProSci practitioner world is familiar with him. As for the others, he's the founder, director of MARG, and heads our consulting function. He's a ProSci change practitioner, facilitator, and advisor. He has applied ProSci methodology into both into companies, both as a leader and now as a consultant in various different types of change scenario. So without much ado, over to you, Krish.
Thank you, Sudeshna, and good afternoon to all of you. This is one of my favorite webinars because it touches a topic that we struggle with, we grapple with, we engage with anytime we touch change, both personal and professional change. At any point in time, resistance is a bit of a showstopper, isn't it? Good afternoon again. And let me take you through a little bit of why we are having this conversation. ProSci is a world leader in the subject of change management. And I like to point out that it's not because one or two people think so. They got a high footprint of the Fortune 100. There are 60,000 upward practitioners around. Those are all good reasons, but that's not the reason why they're a global leader. They're a global leader because they bring to the table well-researched data. It's data-driven change management as a methodology, but more important, the insights are distilled from change practitioners across the world, across domains, across contexts. What we do as ProSci is go to practitioners and understand from them what works during change and what doesn't work during change. We do this with a beat rate of roughly once in 2 years. And interim, while we are digesting the information that comes out of that massive core study, as we call it, we also do topical research in a variety of areas. Those areas include reinforcing change, that includes agile. And for the soft note, it includes managing resistance to change. What we do in these research is go to a group of people who are working in that particular area and ask them very, very critical questions, important questions, specific questions, and try to resolve the challenge in that area. I'll take you through a little bit of what we did in this particular study. I'm going to give you findings. I'm going to give you actionable insights. But before we do that, let's agree on some modus operandi. How are we going to work through this 1 hour and make it as effective for you as we can make it? The technology part. We are working on Zoom as a platform. And on this platform, you should be able to see a chat icon as well as a Q&A icon. Our request, in order for our team to be able to manage the questions and moderate the conversation, all technical questions, I would ask you to pop them into the chat pane. The chat pane directly goes to all the panelists. It allows one of us to respond to it. Anything on the topic itself, I would request you to use the Q&A window so that as you ask the questions, someone can look through the questions and figure out how and what manner we can respond to them. The third ask is, please have a sheet of paper in front of you, a pen in front of you. All through this conversation, I'm going to be pointing you to insights and then asking you, what does that mean to you? And we have found that that's the most effective way to take something actionable out of this conversation. The last part is Poll EV. For those of you who are familiar with this, Poll EV is a platform through which I can pose a question. That question appears in a device of yours. And as and when you answer that question, the responses turn up in aggregate on the slide. So let's start with something to get a flavor of how Pole EV works. If I could request you guys to go to this website, poleev.com/marg transform. When you go to this website on your phone, on a secondary device of some kind, you should see a question pop up. The URL is on the top of the screen. It probably is in your chat window, I guess. Thank you. And this is a good insight for us to have. We get a better flavor of who's around us in this webinar. And this is something that often excites me about the field of change management. I came into change management as a leader when I was grappling with how do I bring my people along when my classical leadership skills alone are not sufficient. I need something more. I need something more as an overlay. And this is a picture that I see often appearing in our sessions, where very often people are coming in not as specialist change managers, not as people who know about a particular methodology or about ProSci, but they're coming in out of sheer need to deal with a change management topic. I can also see that there are some SMEs in the game, some people who are practitioners or more, who are saying, okay, show me what you have new. And that's good to have that conversation too in this webinar. Thank you for this insight. With this insight, let me move on to a more topical question. What drew you to this webinar of managing resistance? What brought you to this particular topic? What issues are you dealing with? Is it about the topic? Is it about the project you're working on? Is it about a particular kind of resistance you're dealing with? What drew you to this webinar? You should have a text box on your screen, and as you type in stuff, it should turn up on the screen. Yes, bringing people along is not people. We know people are like layers of a cake, right? There are different groups of people involved, and they all have different stakes in the game. And they all have different perspectives on the change. So dealing with that resistance is a challenge. Yes, it is an inevitable part of delivering change, isn't it? And how we deal with it is a function of who we are, what methodology we are using, what the culture of the organization is, and where is this resistance coming from? A whole host of things contributes to managing that. Refreshing my knowledge, absolutely important. We need to stay current. We are seeing that change management itself is an interdisciplinary area. There are lots of other disciplines that contribute to change management, and staying abreast is absolutely important. Being aware of resistance components, that's a good one. What goes on to make resistance happen? And some parts of what we touched today, active and passive resistance, should give you a taxonomy, a way to describe what is happening. Innovations, tools, techniques to identify reasons, types, and tips to overcome. Wow, that's someone who's very, very specific and very clear on what they want. Thumbs up. Yes, we are looking at what drives that whole storyline. When you think of stakeholders, when you think of people, when you think of that whole group of people coming along in resistance, it's important for us to know what our own stand in it is. Right? Perhaps it's wise for me, before I get into what this conversation is all about, to describe what I'm thinking of when I say resistance. I'm sure each of you has had an experience of seeing a big box on the ground and pushing it. You need to push it. You need to move it out of the way. Now, this is where our experiences branch. Sometimes you bend down because of the big box, you put in all your energy and you push, and it slides through smoothly. Sometimes you put in all your effort and push, and it doesn't move. Sometimes you put in all your effort and you push, and it goes off 1 inch and stops. Where I'm going with this is, well, I know mentally you're thinking about friction, but I don't want to directly make it about friction. I want to talk about the fact that we automatically expect resistance when we're dealing with larger change, and that's perfectly right. That's perfectly good. But in none of my scenarios did you ever say bad box. Resistance is not wrong. There's nothing bad about resistance. There's nothing that we need to judge about resistance. We are looking at resistance purely from the perspective of something that delays my successfully moving box from point A to point B. And what do you do with it? Do you call for help? Do you get someone else to come and say, box, this change is really good for you, please move over? Whatever the equivalent is, right? But resistance is our active engagement with the change, is a part of that entire story. I think that was one of the points. It's a part of the entire story. We are not walking into this conversation saying resistance is unacceptable. We, in fact, are saying resistance is a part of the human condition. It is a very natural thing. When it turns up, what do you do with it? In this context, our approach for the study, and for most of the studies we do, is what can we find out about resistance that converts it to something actionable, something that I can go back and start working on. And start working on not from a absurdly complex perspective. Try to keep it elegantly simple. Try to keep it something that is just enough, function and form fit in beautifully. That's our intent in any of our studies, especially in this study. In this study of resistance, we went into the equation asking the question, resistance is natural. It is going to happen, and it's perfectly fine that it happens. I am already doing a lot of work on actively managing resistance. What else can I do? What else is in the game? What else do I need to understand? Those are the questions that we try to deal with when talking about this study. I'm sure some of you are saying, okay, sounds good so far. You're showing me slides on research and so on and so forth. So what is it that you think we already do? Answer to the question is, those of you who are practitioners have seen this before. Those of you who aren't, the short version is we already know, out of our understanding across various disciplines, that there are 7 key concepts that we need to take into account when we roll out change. And those concepts cover a variety of organizational relationships, organizational dynamics. One among these concepts is resistance. There's the fact that resistance and comfort are something that play off against each other. The fact that people find the current state the best place to stay in. It's very natural human reaction. Like I said, the box likes to be where it is. And the question then becomes, given that resistance is a natural reaction to the change, what do we do with it? We do not want to eliminate it. Most of the time when resistance management fails, or sometimes change fails, and there is a history of failed change, it's probably because as the resistance rolled out, it didn't land quite well, and people were left saying, that was forced down our throat. So we want to mitigate it. We can't eliminate it. We don't want to eliminate it. We're trying to mitigate its effects. In a formal construct, when we start working on a change, we use what are called 3 phases of change. We go through a very, very intensive process of trying to find out what is this change about. And then we create 5 plans. Those 5 plans include communication, sponsorship, training, and coaching, and resistance management. In that plan, we spend a lot of time already on figuring out what we can do with resistance, what is proactive resistance, what is reactive resistance. We're already putting a lot of effort. Again, coming back to the study, the question then became, what else should we know? What else can we know? And that is the context in which I'm introducing this set. This next 45 minutes, I'm going to take you through what were key findings, what else do we know about resistance that we didn't know before, what else can we use? Again, remember the pen and paper request along the way as we call the top findings. You can start taking notes and then ask yourself, for that current project that you guys gave inputs on, when you're facing resistance, what do you want to do with it? In this particular case, when we went through this research, some of the key elements that I'm going to take you through include what are some of the important things that we need to keep in mind when managing resistance. And this is where active and passive resistance management is going to come in. We're going to talk about, is it worth it to spend time planning for resistance? What is this planning for resistance management and how does that help? The second thing we're going to do, we're going to talk about what does it mean to address resistance? What does it mean to deal with resistance? One of the things that came up in this research, this topic of research, was a concept called constructive resistance. What we mean as ProSci, by constructive resistance is resistance not to do with the way the change is coming through, but resistance about the change itself. This is in the area of, I think the solution design doesn't make sense for me. This is in the area where we want to find constructive resistance, constructive inputs that maybe help us improve the quality of the change. So this is a new perspective that we got and we're sharing with you on the fact that sometimes resistance is not about how the change is coming through, but about the change itself. And that's probably worth understanding and working with. The last part is saturation. So these are some of the things that we're going to be discussing over these next 40 minutes. Let's get into the game and talk about some top findings in the area of what is this active resistance. Definition first, right? Active resistance for us is what happens when a group is actively opposing, actively taking up actions. They are doing things that prevent the change from propagating. It's not just being inert or not supporting it. They're actively doing something about it. And we asked the questions, and incidentally, the questions were asked to a large group of pure change practitioners who are dealing with resistance. So this is what's happening in the field. We asked them, how do you deal with this? What is the storyline on overcoming active resistance? These are the answers. Engaging executive sponsorship. Those of you who are into change management already know sponsorship is a critical element of the game. But on the subject of active resistance, we need a sponsor. And that's not just one sponsor. We need the whole coalition. We need every leader in the game to be the face, to be the voice, to be in the war zone and have that critical conversation on what is this resistance, where is this coming from, and how do you want to play it? The first element was engaging executive sponsorship. The second part is communicating proactively. A big thing that came up in that communicating proactively was, and I'm going to talk about it a little further, communicating is a big chunk of the game, was about how transparently you do it. How far before the time you do it. What all do you call out? Do you call out only things you know? You call out things that you don't know also. How clear are you to the different groups? How relevant is what you're saying to those groups? All that was extremely important for that active resistance, to be able to engage, saying, yes, it is this, it is not that. Face-to-face is exceptionally important in this storyline. The third one, identifying and confronting it directly. One of the participants used the phrase, name it to tame it. And it's a good, powerful phrase. It talks about the fact that at some point, that active resistance group, individual, team, needs to be brought face to face with the fact that this is what you're doing is resistance. And this is causing this impact on your change. You have to name it in order to deal with it, in order for you to move forward with that person, with that group, with that context. Equipping and enabling managers. Most of the time, yes, obviously you're a change manager, you've been designated to make this happen. But remember, as a leader, you also need you and your organization to deal with that resistance. And managers need the help. They need the training. They need the support. They need a lot of help in order to make this happen. And the last one is good. Give them space, give them responsibility, give them accountability, and make them a part of the change. Making active resistors who have a strong point of view, who have a very decided point of view, to be brought into the game, to be said, here is a responsibility you have. I hope you understand it. You're going to be a part of the game. You're not a spectator in this game commenting on it. You're not an armchair observer. You are a part of the game. How do you want to play it? These are all means by which participants said active resistance can be overcome. In this and many of the following slides, I'm going to draw your attention to the top right. You see this icon, which has a notepad and a pen. I would request you this where you use a sheet of paper and capture which of these items make the most sense for you in your change, in the change you were thinking about when you came into the session. All right. With that request, I'm moving on to the next version, next opportunity, next kind of resistance, passive resistance. What's the story of passive resistance? They're not engaging in any programs or activities. They are staying apart. The kindest way is probably to look at it as wait and watch. But an unkind way to look at it is they're disengaged. They don't want to be part of the game. That's your passive resistance right there. How do you bring them on board? And we asked practitioners that question. Here were their responses. Transparently came up as such a huge part of the response. Those of you who are familiar with process research know that when you have multiple qualitative responses, the responses are ranked. Communicating transparently came in as one, really high up the chain. And what does the transparently mean? Like I said, what we know, what we don't know, what's failed, what's not failed, what we are uncertain about. This environment we're all in, the pandemic, is a great environment in which the transparency also helps leaders sometimes bring up the vulnerabilities that they have, that they don't really know, that they are also struggling through the change. We are actively working on a few change projects where the leader's ability to not be the stern commanding leader who says, I know where we want to go and let's go here, is counterproductive. Where the organization is saying, no, you don't. None of us do. We don't know when it's going to end. Why are you feeding us this? So a good chunk of passive resistance, think about it both ways, right? Transparently is for overcoming it. When it's not that transparent, when it feels like the project team or sponsors or someone knows more than I do, I'm going to have questions. I'm going to wait till I have all the information. That's one part of the team. Using positive peer influence and change agent networks. Change agent networks are an increasing role during most of the changes we are seeing. And using the change agent network to have a group of people who are engaged in the change, who are saying, why aren't we participating? Why isn't this team participating? Why aren't you participating? Having that conversation as a peer group is exceptionally important. We all know this from influencing, we know this from change management, we know this from a variety of disciplines, that bringing communities together on a change is going to make a huge difference. And that also involves us as change managers, giving them that responsibility and giving them a role. Our ability to do that definitely helps to overcome passive resistance. The third part is participation. We saw this in the last slide too, right? Bring more people into the game. Make it a larger phenomenon. Make it a movement. It doesn't just have to be an event. It never is an event. Change is a process. It's not going to be, hey, go live happened and we are now a new organization. No. Change is the process. Bring people into the process. The last one, of course, get leadership into the game. Get leadership in the game, make sure that they understand that they have to actively and visibly support the change and move the change forward. Again, these are the top 4 specific tactics, contributors that participants said helps to overcome passive resistance. They're saying this works. Please capture it please capture whatever works for you, for your change, for your current challenge into your notepad. And now let me take you through what I find very interesting in any of these studies. This question. We often ask this in ProSci. We ask the question, what would you do differently in this? And that's basically what are your learnings from this, right? So what would you do differently when overcoming resistance? And this question is very, very important. The first point they said is, we underestimated the amount of effort we need, support we need, resources we need. We underestimated it. It takes more than what we thought it would. The second part, start earlier. Start earlier is not just start change management earlier, start resistance management earlier. Start bringing onto the table the fact that resistance is going to be a tough cookie. It's going to be something that's going to be difficult. Bring that onto the game. Unfortunately, sometimes the way resistance management works, in sequence, it kind of comes after making sure sponsors do this, managers do this, then we talk about resistance management. No, bring resistance management upstream. Which also means make sure that you're setting very strong expectations with the sponsors on the fact that, hey, you will need to manage the resistance. You will need to deal with the fact that people may not be willing to participate for a variety of reasons. But not willing to participate, how are you going to react to it? How are you going to bring them on board? At what point do you want to put in effort and energy? Sponsor, Mr. Sponsor, Miss Sponsor, this is going to be a good chunk of energy. Because we went live, magic didn't happen. People still need to adopt and use. You need to bring them along. The next one, of course, was middle managers and supervisors. Train them, equip them, enable them, after making sure they themselves are convinced with the change. We often say this in ProSci. that you need to treat managers as an employee first before you tell them, now bring your team on board with this change. That has to happen. A robust plan. This is the part where participants underestimated the support they needed. There is a phrase that goes, bringing a knife to a gunfight. They often said, my resistance management plan went when the actual resistance happened. My plans were not strong enough, did not have enough options, enough challenges that could be met, enough scenarios that could have been built in. Last part, of course, back to communicate more. All these were from your colleagues, from change practitioners who are doing this work day after day, saying, these are the things that we'd focus on if we had a second chance. Again, please note down something that makes sense for you. And on poll EV, you have a question coming up. In your mind, in your changes, which of these following have you found to be most effective? And remember, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options. You can pick any 2. That makes sense. Starting earlier in the project is pretty important because you need a seat at the table. Enlisting sponsors, engaging middle managers. You need to get the organizational hierarchy into the game. You absolutely have to. A strong plan is going to be critical. My apologies for the misspelling there. And communicating more. We need to make sure that we are landing. Different roles in the organization, different human beings in the organization. Communication is the cement that connects all of us. Good, effective, relevant, meaningful, timely communication is definitely what's going to solder us together. As the numbers settle on, you're seeing sponsorship, good sponsorship, and great communication. And here's an interesting thought. Sometimes we need great sponsors to communicate well. Those two actually go together. What do we have at this point? At this point, we have a good understanding of how the game works in terms of where are the contributors to overcoming active resistance and passive resistance, and what are some learnings that we can have out of this. Before we move on to more quantitative findings, I'd like you to take about 30, 40 seconds and think about what does this mean for you? You've been noting out individual points. What does this mean for you? Suresh, in the meanwhile, are there any questions I can take? Yep, problem.
Yes. So can resistance contribute to positive results? And with that, yeah, you can just take that, because the other part, I will put it into the constructive resistance part.
Actually, I was going to respond with that too. Yes, we want, so there are 2 parts. One is I as change practitioner, when I work on change, I look forward to seeing the resistance because it tells me something is landed, right? In the absence of resistance, I don't even know if things are going through and people are seeing the change as being real, seeing the change as being something that's going to affect them, and so on and so forth. Engagement, for me, often resistance, the first signs of resistance are a good signal that engagement is beginning to occur. So for me, definitely, I look forward to see the resistance, one part of it. And as we're going to touch on the constructive resistance component, what we are describing typically as resistance is the behavior. What we need to know is the why. And the moment we explore the why, and when I say we, that's the change managers, the project managers, the sponsors, the moment we explore the why, you're going to find, hopefully, many nuggets of issues that the teams are facing with, some of which we can probably address, and some of which at least we can communicate saying, I hear you, I know the struggle, we need to do this, we need to power through this. It is an excellent communication to have with the organization. So definitely resistance is important and it's useful. Definitely useful, no 2 ways about it. Yeah. Thank you, Sudesh. I'm going to move on and ask for questions a little later again. Let's look at some quantitative data that popped up. One of the questions we asked is, did you actually make plans to deal with resistance? 83%, absolutely yes. Did it make a difference? So there's always a what, and then there's a so what component, right? So did it make a difference that you planned? Oh, yes, it did. When we did plan, 51% of the cases, when we planned, we met and exceeded our objectives. Versus, we didn't plan and only 20% met or exceeded. And we found the same pattern with schedule. We found the same pattern with budgets. Essentially, planning does help. It contributes positively to your project outcomes. Fine. Next question. What are in that planning, right? What are some of the tactics that you used? What kind of, when you say plan, you did plan, what kind of tactics, plans, what structure did you come up with? And the answers were these. In our standard change management methodology from ProSci, those of you who are practitioners, you know, you've seen many of these items. But for all of us, for the rest of us, we have very, very strong communication as a part of the plan. We make sure that we have a strong sponsor who's prepped, who's engaged in the change, who's wanting the change to occur as a part of that resistance management. We formally take managers and supervisors and enable them, empower them, train them, educate them, heighten their awareness, give them tools with which to deal with the change. And lastly, a good, strong identification of who's getting impacted, very specific identification. Now, X is getting impacted by these changes to this extent. How are they going to react? How can we help them? How can we help them deal with the change better? So these are all the things that we do when we plan for the change. That 83% is doing this. And if I look at this list, obviously I'm going to say if they do this and they do this well, obviously they're going to have a positive impact on their project. Next question. Fine, plans are good. Do you have resources? Do you have people with which to deliver the result? 66%, 2/3 of your colleagues are saying yes, we are planning for resources. That could be money, time, budget, people, headcount. But 2/3 of them are saying yes, and yet again, it does make a difference. 52% versus 29%. Those who had resources met their objectives 52% of the time. Those who didn't have resources met their objectives and beat the objectives 29% of the time. The difference is stark. Third element of this whole conversation is, all right, so this is about resistance and resistance management plan. What about the whole overall approach? Did you have a strong approach to address resistance? Here the answer is not quite. We had plans, we had these, do this at this date, do that at that date, but it wasn't a structured approach. Some of you might ask, okay, what, aren't we overdoing this? Resistance is, as we agreed, one element of the whole game. Why do we need to do all this? The answer to that question comes from an associated set of questions we asked them. We asked them, what are some behaviors you see resistance pop up through? What do you see when there is resistance? They gave us about 40 odd behaviors, and we took those 40 odd behaviors and put them into 8 buckets. What do these tell us? These tell us, and this is the answer to this part, right? We need to not just identify the behaviors. The structure gives us a way to deal with it. That's why we need a structure. Let's parse that a little bit. These, what you're seeing on the screen, are the behaviors and the buckets, right? So what is negativity? It's miscommunication, objections, complaining, sarcasm. What's building barriers? Excuses, counter approaches, recruiting dissenters. So we've taken different behaviors and put them into different buckets. At this point, is this useful? Let's think about that. Let's get some data from you and then do this interactively, right? On poll EV, you should be seeing an image pop up. My ask is on whatever device you have, you should be able to tap or click with your cursor or tap on the screen on the kind of resistance you have typically encountered in your projects. I would request you to tap at least 2 or 3 buckets. Thank you. And here is my thought process and see if it makes sense for you, right? If I did know that in my case, for my change, I'm going to be dealing with a lot of avoidance. People are going to be ignoring the change and they're going to be workarounds and they're going to go back to my older system and the older behaviors. Knowing that, I'm going to structure my resistance management plan a little differently. I'm going to think about what do I have as disincentives for people to go back into that old system? What can I highlight to them from an understanding perspective, why going back to the old system might not be healthy for them, might not be good for them. If I know that being disengaged is the most typical reaction, I'm going to also ask myself and discuss with the sponsor, what about my culture allows me to do that? How can I make it a little more in your face? How do I bring more managers into the game to encourage them to bring their employees on board? Our manager is going to demonstrate the behavior. If it's going to be emotional, I'm also going to involve HR and ask, where are these emotions coming from? Is there a history over here? Is there a story over here? Is this what happens with every change? And do I need to do it differently? The point I'm making is knowing these behaviors and understanding these categories is going to have a positive effect on our change management storyline. So this now instead of a bar chart, I put pie charts. We can put pie charts over here for you to see how does this make a difference to us. And if you notice the way it's structured, the top row goes from 81 to 73%. The bottom row starts at 54%. So there's definitely a category 1 and a category 2 sitting here, a level 1 and a level 2 sitting here. In my own experience, I like to point out that very often that first group is perhaps not very obvious, may not be very visible. We need to keep our eyes and ears and hearts open to track these even more than these. These second 4 are easy to see. They are easy to visualize. The first 4 are going to be a little below the iceberg. The point is, the more we understand the behaviors, the more we can translate it to a structured plan. Hence, the need for a structure in new managing a resistance management plan. A couple of things worth thinking about for you guys is the constructive resistance in this context. When we asked our participants, how often did you encounter this constructive resistance? 47% of the time they said, yes, we have encountered this. Please keep in mind that all resistance is valid, all resistance is good, right? But this constructive resistance is more about the change itself versus how this change is coming, who is giving me this change, who are you, who am I? More than all of that, this is about the fact that something about this change doesn't work, right? Now, this makes sense in my head. Let me just make sure that it makes sense in all our heads by asking you one more poll EV question. What kinds of constructive resistance have you observed? Can you share with us some examples of what constructive resistance you have seen in the changes you have run? And please think about projects that you have been working on now, as well as prior projects. What times have you run into issues that are primarily around the fact that, hey, this change doesn't fit? Do we really need this now? Great question. Impact on current state process. Can we take a risk? Most frequent question I've ever had from managers is, I get this, but my stakeholders are not going to like it. I get this, but there are 3 other changes. Now, how do you want me to sequence it, right? Availability of resources to execute. I want to do it, but help me prioritize, help me put space and time into it. Where is the governance? Who else is looking at it? Is this your hobby? Is this something you always wanted to do in the last organization and you're putting it down my throat? Is your organization ready for the change? So this, I've been asked, especially when there's a multiple demographic in the organization, that they're saying, I get it. I don't think they are going to get it. How do you want me to bring them along, right? How questions are sometimes sitting in this context. How can we even do this in the timeline you're thinking of? Sometimes it comes up with more emotion. How do you even think this is possible? It can come up that way also. And here's the interesting part. As you look at some of them, procrastination, non-participation, ignorance of change communication, you realize even this can be constructive. They can be struggling with the change. Here is the deal. To find out whether the issue, the resistance is with the change or the change management, or where is the core, where the root comes out of conversation. We are happy with the existing stuff. We are happy with the current state. We don't really think it makes sense because guess what? We are paid to do X. We are paid to deliver productivity. We are asking them to change the quality. Where is it coming from? So our discussion, these are great examples. Thank you for sharing. These are great examples. Thank you for sharing them. And as you look at this, you realize the importance of communication, the need for us to connect to the organization. Since we know that this can exist, we do have a challenge in how we manage the change itself. It's going to require a few things for us to overcome this. What are tactics? What are ways in which you can overcome it? A, think about your change plans itself. You might need to revisit them. And that requires you to have a great bond with the project management team. They should not view you as, oh yeah, you heard them not happy about it and you want me to change the project. The second part is make sure that you're taking these challenges, these concerns up to leadership, and they can address it. They can bring it on the table. They can call out the fact that I want to do better as an organization. I would like to give you more space, more resources. I would like to give you a different solution, but this is the best we can do. Are you willing? How can I make it easier for you? Those are conversations leaders are best placed to have. Revisit the project solution. And that's again, like I said, the solution design discussion, the discussion of us working hand in hand with project managers and asking ourselves, do we have leeway? Can someone get on the bus a little later? Can they come on a later date? Can they come on in a different form and shape on this particular change? What modifications can we make? And those are all great conversations to have once we know that the resistance is in fact about the change and a struggle to make the change happen. Again, resistance is useful, it's inevitable. It is something that we need to engage and address. We cannot eliminate it, we need to mitigate it. Again, let me pause. I'm hoping your notepads have been busy thus far. I would ask you to consider the things that we have been discussing, right? The need to plan for the resistance, the kind of behaviors that can pop up during the resistance, the kind of resources you need for resistance, as well as constructive resistance. And ask yourself, what is one or two things you want to change in your current approach? Suresh, are there any questions I can take in the meanwhile?
Yeah, there is this one which kind of, since it's in the constructive resistance area. So what is the difference between constructive resistance versus feedback?
Great question. For me, a feedback loop is a critical part of all communication. In fact, when we work on a communication plan, one of the things that we ask our participants to do and what I do on the field is make sure that every piece of communication that goes out has a feedback on what has landed, how has it been interpreted, what did people get out of it. A feedback loop by itself is nothing more than the existence of the loop. The feedback is nothing more than this is what I'm experiencing. Constructive resistance is how we are spending time with that item and figuring out whether it's about the change or it's about change management. What is that feedback about? Constructive resistance is where we are applying the intelligence of the organization, intelligence of our respective roles, project managers, change managers, and sponsors to figure out what is this resistance about. For example, feedback comes along saying, we can't do this. We can't do this because we're short on time. We can't do this because this is a stupid solution. We can't do this because I don't like XYZ. All this sits in the storyline of feedback, what comes down the tube. Now, how do we parse it? The first one sounds like saturation to me. It sounds like a very constructive resistance saying, I've got too many things to do, I don't think I can do it. It is still an unwillingness to participate, but I don't think I can do it because that because is where the game sits. And we call it then constructive resistance when we know this is the reason. I've heard constructive resistance about sponsorship where a group has come back and said, we can do it under any other leader, but not this leader because the last 3 changes this leader has taken us through, it's not landed well. What we do with it is a secondary question. It's probably off topic and I'm not going down that part, but keep in mind that in the minds of the people who are going through the change, they're not saying, I want to push back because I don't like this. It's not emotional. It's not irrational. It's about the fact that this change is a challenge for me. And for these reasons, it allows us as management to take a decision on what can we do about it. So, Deshna, do you think that answered the question?
Quite. Yeah, I'm taking a few more questions at this point. Change is always human perspective or any other element is there to it?
I'm trying to parse that question. If the question is about how we have been approaching this conversation, and it has been very, very people related, the reason for that is we are doing this under the topic of change management. And change management, unlike project management, is about how do we get people to adopt the change. So at least from our perspective, from my perspective, change management is all about people. It doesn't mean it's not science, it's not data, but it's all about people. Project management is about the technical side of the change, where we where we design, develop, and deliver the change. Whereas in this side of the game, as change managers, we are all about embracing and adopting and using. Hence, you hear the conversation being very people-centric, but that doesn't mean that we are not about rational thought. This 1 hour is focused purely on the subject of resistance, and hence it talks more and more about people and what's running in their heads and what can we do about it. But no, change management is a lot more than just about emotions, if I can put it that way. But it's all about people. That makes sense?
Yes. Um, this is a good one. How to get cooperation and contribution from managers. We all know the segment, I think, where research also says the resistance we face the most from are sometimes managers. So how to get cooperation from them since they are to mobilize the change?
Great question. Sorry, after I answer this question, I'm going to go back to the last bit that I wanted to share with the team. Managers and supervisors are, the way we see it in ProSci, the way we see it during change, they are charged with having a role during the change to lead the change, to be leaders of change. Unfortunately, they also have another role, which is preserve the value stream that they are in charge of. So we tell them, make sure that your business as usual is not affected, but make sure that you're a partner in the change. The way we go about it as a group is first, bring them on board as an employee. Since the ask is very difficult, keep the things that are running well, run well, as well as deliver the change. We first go with them and help them understand why they need to be a part of the change. Managers as employees first get a chance to debate, to discuss, to push back, to resist, to call out the fact that this change may not work, to provide constructive. Definitely that community brings beautiful constructive, very solid constructive resistance into the game. I usually find it from that group because they are rolling up their sleeves and getting stuff done. Giving them that space, bringing them on board is a key part of getting managers and supervisors onboarded in the change. The second part is making sure that leadership, a coalition of leaders, are giving consistent messages to those managers and leaders. Last part is acknowledging the fact that managers and supervisors need a lot of support in coaching their employees. They need a lot of support in managing the resistance. And that's a role in which we as change managers can be very, very supportive. We can help their leaders support those managers, and we can also directly support their managers. So those are 2-3 things that we do on field in order to make managers successful. So Vishnu, does that make sense? I'm sorry, I'm using you as a litmus test on whether that makes sense.
It does. You can finish and we can take the rest of the sentence once a little later.
Sure, absolutely. The last couple of things I wanted to share with you is we talked about resistance primarily in context of a change, during the project, about constructive resistance, about active resistance, about passive resistance. But there is also a larger game that most employees are a part of during times of change. That is the amount of change that is happening around them. Over the last few years, we have been seeing that when we ask them, how much of change do you expect to see in the next few years? The number on the right side of the chart keeps increasing. Most participants keep calling out the fact that we expect the amount of change that is hitting us to keep increasing slightly or significantly. The question then is, all the changes are eventually hitting one or few employees, especially in a matrix organization. The function requires some change, the location requires a change, the region requires a change, headquarters requires a change, environment, regulators, competition requires change. Your own employees want you to change. So the average employee might be in the middle, the eye of the storm of very many changes being asked of them. So what about saturation? When we ask the question on how much do you think the saturation has an impact on the degree of resistance, the answer again was 75% of the participants said yes. There's an overwhelming impact of saturation on an employee's resistance. So it might not be wise for us to just focus on the resistance coming out of this project, but it might make sense for us to step back and ask, what are all other changes happening? Again, your manager group are in a great position to talk about that. Not necessarily employees, not necessarily sponsors, but the managers, like it or not, sometimes play a filtering role, definitely play a prioritizing role on which changes go through where and how many changes are hitting them. And again, what are some ways in which we can see this impact? What are some ways in which this impact of saturation hits us? Definitely there's a greater amount of resistance. There's non-project specific resistance. And if you've ever been in those meetings and you have a large group of employees, and you have a beautiful project. It's been a lot of effort, a lot of technology, a lot of expertise applied into it. And they say, yeah, but what about that? What about this? And as you hear the what about that, what about this, it gives you a flavor that they're looking at it as a bigger picture. In the bigger picture, is this project something they can sink their teeth into? The capacity of change, the ability to breathe, to go into one more training session on one more new way of doing things reduces. Projects do fail, and there's an exhaustion that creeps in. Oh man, not another change. Yeah, let's take the next pass. Those are all natural reactions to what could happen. Let's do a quick dipstick in this group that we have in the webinar, right? We call this in ProSci the fist to fly way of checking a particular answer. So if this had been face-to-face, would I just ask you to raise your hands, right? And say, raise your fist in case you feel you have lots of capacity for change. Raise your all 5 fingers to say you have absolutely no capacity for change. And the world sits in the middle, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Since we can't do it on a face-to-face basis, again, I'm going to resort to poll everywhere. And I'm asking you to call out from your perspective, how many fingers will you put up to that question? Where is your organization on a change saturation spectrum? Your organization, so in this context, could also be your client organization, if you like, right? But where are they on this change saturation spectrum? We have lots of capacity, we have little capacity, we are really pushing ourselves hard. And as the picture rolls in, you'll see that there is, in general, a push on the higher levels. Why? I've often seen this mix, right? Where the people undergoing the change feel that they have a little more than they can handle. And the people driving the change feel that they have a little less, that more can be pushed, right? So I often find leadership picking these as responses and non-leadership roles picking these as responses. And that's worth keeping in mind. There is a certain amount of bias that comes out of the roles you sit in the organization as we comment upon this. Why is this important? Keep in mind that sometimes the issue is not your project or you or the particular change management methodology you brought in. The context is a challenge. You definitely need sponsor attention and help to parse this. With that, what were you doing over this last 1 hour? Trying to help you understand that this is real. It is going to happen. Resistance is not a bad thing. Resistance is natural, but we can harness it. We can work with it. We can plan for it. And it's basically not just us alone doing it. We leverage the organization, sponsors, managers, all of them to help you in that game. Because eventually it's going to be one-to-one conversations, it's going to be face-to-face conversations. Eventually it's got to be sponsors and managers saying things differently. Eventually it's trying to bring people and give them more roles during the change. You saw all that as tactics. And all of that requires your organization to be more willing to accept resistance as a part of the game and manage it really, really well. I hope these findings were useful for you. There is a much larger, more detailed report that is sitting elsewhere in the ProSci world. But this is an excellent glimpse, and we thought it makes sense to share it in India. Question for you. What do you have as a takeaway from this webinar? I'm hoping the question is available for you. I hope that this question is available for you on your screen. In the meanwhile, Sudeshna, any other questions that I have not been able to answer?
We have a few questions. I'm just kind of trying to put them together so that, everybody wants an answer. In case we do not manage to in this time, we shall take it. We are taking responsibility that your questions are answered eventually in person as well. So one has come as, can lesser adoption be considered as a sign of resistance? And in case, can we focus more on the adoption or on resistance?
Great question. Sorry, wait, did I cut you off? Were you going to say?
No. No, I'm saying like, yeah. So it is while adoption is not happening. So is that the focus? I think here.
I'll broaden the question here. it's very important. Research tells us this, that it's important that we have metrics for resistance analyzed and identified very early in the game. We don't only look for adoption, we sometimes look for proficiency, because we often have organizations where the culture is driven by early adoption. People sign up early and then they stop using it really, really well. So sometimes it could be proficiency. Sometimes it could be very early in the game. You can spot resistance by the fact that it's not about adoption, but people are not willing to get trained. People are not engaging in providing feedback, which are not to do with adoption and proficiency. They are to do with unwillingness to give constructive resistance. They don't turn up for your UATs. You're seeing leadership, not necessarily role modeling. So depending upon your change, you can identify resistance by using a variety of metrics, and you should use a variety of metrics for different stages of your project. Let's say you're upfront, you're not even designed, you don't have solution design in place. You might see early signs of resistance with people saying, not now, not now, not now. So it will not only be adoption, but adoption can be a good, easily identifiable metric. In the meanwhile, sorry, Sushna, I'm also switching on to the next page. Thank you for these takeaways. What we have now on Poll Everywhere is a screen that looks like this. And you should be, on your Poll Everywhere screen, you should be able to click on a smiley to tell us whether this was useful for you, right? But Sudeshna, please do continue with the questions in the meanwhile.
Okay, so this one is about how about managing resistance due to fear of losing control?
Fear, I think, is the fourth main reason why employees resist change. And sometimes it's from managerial roles, it's from SME roles. There are two parts to the game. If you ask me, what do I do with it? I'm facing this right now, what do I do with it? A, highlight it to the sponsor. Make sure that the sponsor gets to see it. I find it very useful to not just communicate it to the sponsor, but I like to bring sponsor into a room which has those SMEs who are saying, no, we don't want to share it, right? It's good for sponsors to experience it directly. That's one part of it. The other part of it is you need to understand, where is that resistance coming from? Is SME saying, I won't let go control because they're very sure the change is going to fail and people will not follow up? Are they saying they will not let go control because they have governance reason for it? Are they saying they will not let go of control because they know the sponsor is going to lose interest? Where is it coming from? What element of the organization process, procedure, storyline allows them to do it is worth investigating. The other part is, why are they not seeing the value of the new proposal? Is it because the new solution doesn't make sense? Is it because it's going to take away their skill set? And what are the alternatives you can offer for that? How can you help them deal with that? All those are things that I would do in the case of SMEs. Definitely get sponsor up and front and center of that conversation. Sorry, while Sudeshna looks for another question. When we talked about coalition of sponsors, we include SMEs there in some cases. We make SMEs a part of the group that needs to sell the change upfront, make them a part of the solution.
This is like not a direct resistance management question, but I can well understand, since resistance is seen as something which is like synonymous to change management. So the question is, how do we convince top management to allocate budget on change management operations?
Great question. There's a lovely webinar, Tim Creasy's webinar, that talks about, don't talk about what you do, talk about what you deliver. I found in my experience, sponsors react best to knowing what you will be accountable for. And research tells us 50% of sponsors do not know that they have a role during change. So in my head, most of the time that issue crops up because the sponsors have not seen successful change management. They are not sure how to place change management as a part of the larger game of the different things that happen during change. They don't know if there's an overlap. They don't know what success would look like. They don't know what adoption and usage would look like. They've not heard someone take accountability for it. So for me, step one would be to help them understand what is it that we do. What actual concrete value can you bring to the table? Step one. Step two, I always advise, don't pick a project, pick a sponsor. Try and find a sponsor who maybe in their earlier avatars, in different personas, in different organizations, have seen change management work, and start with a couple of lighthouse projects. Start with a couple of easy to achieve projects where they can see the benefit, and then connect the dots and elevate the conversation to a senior level. The third part, make your requests as meaningful as possible. I need this because I'm going to do that. This is not about project accountability. I'm just saying simplistically, I need to hire an outside communication consultant because you've been struggling with this. So sometimes make your request activity-based. All those could be things I would suggest.
Okay. We have a little more, we are way past 1 o'clock, but I'm still taking a couple more questions.
Sure.
In most projects, what this question is, it's a long question, so I'm just passing it as, in most projects, the project teams or the managers, they don't understand OCM. So it seems that they struggle about, meaning they are focusing on the solution design, and it looks like they need to be taught first about the customer as to whom the people are. So how can we bridge this issue which is prevailing between the project managers and the delivery aspect of it?
Great question. Change management takes change management. For us to be successful in our change management efforts, we need to help those role holders. One is the leadership and one is project managers. Understand what our role in this change could be. So that's a very fair question. Again, just like I said for sponsors, project managers have not seen it working well. You must remember that for most of project management, for the longest of time, change management meant something else. It meant change within the contours of the project. It meant changes to the charter of the project. It meant things that typically a cab would be handling. And even as change management grew and project management grew and went on to other areas. It could be in agile, it could be in services management, ITL. Wherever it went, you'd always see change management factored in as a part of it. Sometimes large, well-integrated analytics or systems-based or ERP-based projects have their own OCM module. So have sympathy and empathy for your project managers who are saying, yeah, everyone says change management. So who's actually doing change management? And am I not already doing enough? Think of it as a reasonable pushback from them. And then ask yourself, what can you put on the table? Adoption, utilization, proficiency. If you're able to tell them that, look, if you have me by your side, I'm going to ensure that people start buying into your change, using it and using it well. And because you're using it well, you're going to see results. And all this will happen within your project timeline. You're talking music to their ears. Being more specific about the value proposition is definitely where I would start.
This is the last question we are taking. This is a question on change saturation in particular. Okay, as a change manager, sometimes due to poor planning, a lot of change comes through. But under the pressures, we need to approve all of the changes. All of the changes need to go through, and sometimes maybe senior management is not in the picture. And it is the poor planning from the project managers and the owners of the groups that happens. How do we reduce this kind of changes? Delinquent changes.
In the process scheme of reference, we do something called change portfolio management. It's a fairly detailed exercise. We go through the process of doing what you described, right? Making leadership aware of the fact that it's one train station. All these trains are hitting it at the same time. How do you want to play it? Which train comes first? Which train leaves where? How do you want to berth the trains? We take them through that process to help them understand it. And that's my first answer. You need to get leadership support on this question. This is not something that can be swung just by project managers and change managers, because our roles make us be very project specific. So that's one. The second part is, how do we articulate these issues to leadership? Leadership is used to the fact that the organization needs them to do all of this. Are you able to connect the fact that, yes, aggregate, we will be able to do something, but you won't get adoption, utilization, proficiency? Are you able to help them understand the consequences of this in a tangible way? I find far more success when I'm able to say that in this project, you're going to have only about 30 people in this 100-member team who are going to be able to use this tool really, really well. Is that what you want after spending money on licensing for 100 people? That registers as compared to saying they're saturated, they're finding it difficult. So if you're able to connect the issue with the outcome, it's probably at least an alignment. Sometimes I've heard leaders say, I don't care, just roll it out and see what happens. But at least you have that alignment. Those are a few things I would suggest. You need leadership attention on this. Find a sponsor who gets this.
I guess we are kind of more than 5 minutes past the allotted time. And thank you so much, all of you, for attending the webinar. It has been a very interactive session, many questions, many comments. hope we are able to again and again bring you back these kind of webinars. And we are going to have a monthly series of ProSci as well as the other webinars on various other topics as well. So please log on to our next webinar on the 30th, which is on cognitive diversity in times of crisis and others. Thank you so much.